Australia exported $231 billion worth of critical minerals in 2023. That is more than any other country on Earth. The world's largest lithium producer, significant rare earth deposits, iron ore, cobalt, nickel, manganese. Australia has them all. The energy transition, the electric vehicles, the wind turbines, the batteries, the semiconductors, runs on Australian resources. And there is a problem. China processes 80 to 90% of those minerals after Australia digs them up. The world is building a green energy future on a supply chain that runs Australia mines, China processes, then the rest of the world buys. America just signed an $8.5 billion deal to change that. China just announced export controls on rare earths, and Australia is sitting on the resource that everyone is now fighting over. Here is how that triangle works and what Australia does next. $231 billion, the world's top critical mineral exporter, and yet 90% of the processing goes through China, the triangle that defines the energy transition. Australia's strategic position in critical minerals is extraordinary and precarious simultaneously. Extraordinary because no other country combines the scale of mineral reserves, the rule of law investment environment, and the existing logistics infrastructure that Australia has. Precarious because the value in the critical mineral supply chain lies in processing and refining, converting raw ore into battery-grade lithium, rare earth magnets, semiconductor-grade gallium, and Australia currently does almost none of this at scale. The country that could be the world's critical mineral processor is largely content to be the world's critical mineral digger. The episode explains the strategic context for why this needs to change and whether the billions of dollars now being committed by the US, Japan, and Australia itself will be enough to change it. Chapter 1. The World's Quarry: What Australian Ground Contains. Australia's geological endowment is, by any measure, extraordinary. The country is vast, the continent is almost as large as the contiguous United States, and its ancient geology, undisturbed by the major tectonic events that have reshaped other continents, has produced mineral concentrations that geologists have been cataloging and exploiting for 150 years. What is remarkable about the current moment is that the minerals that matter most for the energy transition are disproportionately concentrated in Australian ground. Lithium. Australia is the world's largest lithium producer, accounting for approximately 47% of global production. The Greenbushes mine in Western Australia is the world's largest hard rock lithium mine. Lithium is the critical ingredient in lithium-ion batteries, the batteries in every electric vehicle, every grid-scale energy storage system, and every smartphone and laptop. Without lithium, the energy transition stalls. Rare earth elements. Australia has the third largest rare earth reserves in the world. Rare earths, a group of 17 elements including neodymium, dysprosium, and praseodymium, are essential for the permanent magnets that drive electric motors in EVs, for the motors in wind turbines, and for numerous defense applications. The United States has approximately zero domestic rare earth magnet production. The EU has almost none. Both are acutely dependent on the Chinese supply chain. Nickel, cobalt, manganese, and vanadium, all present in substantial Australian deposits, all required for battery chemistries and advanced manufacturing. Australia's combination of reserves across multiple minerals means that a diversified supply chain for the energy transition can be built largely within Australian geological boundaries, a fact that has not been lost on the United States, Japan, or the EU. Before I explain what is happening with the processing question, hold this. Australia has been the world's quarry for 150 years. It has dug up minerals, shipped them to Asia for processing, and accepted the lower margins that come with being an upstream commodity supplier. The question that this episode is really asking is whether Australia can finally move up the value chain, and why for 150 years it largely has not. Chapter 2. What China Does, the Processing Chokehold. China's dominance in critical mineral processing is the most strategically significant supply chain concentration in the world today. The numbers are stark. Rare earths. China controls approximately 85 to 90% of global rare earth refining and processing capacity. It mines about 60% of global rare earth production, but processes nearly all of it, including ore mined in other countries. Australia's rare earth mines predominantly export ore concentrates to China for processing. The value added in processing is typically 3 to 10 times the value of the raw ore. Australia receives the mining margin. China receives the manufacturing margin. Lithium. China processes approximately 65% of the world's lithium into battery-grade material. Australia mines the most, but China adds the most value. Australian lithium miners, Pilbara Minerals, Mineral Resources, Liontown Resources, have been among the most profitable companies on the ASX during the lithium boom, but the margin available to them is still a fraction of what the Chinese processors and battery manufacturers capture downstream. Graphite, gallium, germanium, cobalt. In each of these minerals, China's processing dominance is between 60 and 95%, and China has demonstrated its willingness to use this dominance as a geopolitical tool. In 2010, it restricted rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute, sending prices soaring and disrupting Japanese manufacturing. In 2023 and 2025, it imposed export controls on gallium and germanium, both critical for semiconductor manufacturing, in response to U.S. semiconductor export controls. In October 2025, it announced sweeping new rare earth export restrictions as the U.S.-China trade war escalated. The October 2025 Chinese rare earth export controls were the most significant turning point in the critical minerals story. They forced the U.S. to acknowledge what it had been slowly approaching, that a supply chain where the most critical materials flow through a single country that is in strategic competition with the United States is not a supply chain, it is a vulnerability. Chapter 3. The U.S.-Australia Deal, October 2025. On October 20, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met at the White House and signed what Albanese called a Critical Minerals and Rare Earths Framework. The headline number was $8.5 billion, the combined pipeline of projects that the two countries committed to supporting. The specific elements of the deal were notable. The United States committed to investing in rare earth processing in Australia, not just mining. The Pentagon committed to investing in a gallium refinery in Western Australia, with a capacity of 100 metric tons per year. Alcoa was identified as exploring a gallium project at one of its alumina refineries in WA, with Japan as a co-investor. The Australian government committed $1.2 billion to a critical mineral strategic reserve, a buffer stock that would give Western manufacturers some protection against Chinese supply disruptions. Within the same week, Japan joined the framework. The U.S.-Japan-Australia three-country structure creates a combined demand pool: Japan's industrial consumption, America's defense and technology needs, Australia's supply, that is large enough to justify the capital investment in processing facilities that would otherwise be economically marginal. The Pentagon's direct investment in Australian processing infrastructure is the most visible signal that the United States now considers Australian critical mineral processing to be a national security issue rather than a trade policy question. Trump's comment at the signing, "In about a year from now, we'll have so much critical mineral and rare earths that you won't know what to do with them," was characteristically optimistic. The reality is more complex. Building processing facilities takes years, not months. Training workforces for precision manufacturing takes years. Developing the supply chain ecosystem around a new processing industry takes a decade. But the direction of travel is unambiguous. The United States is willing to fund the development of a non-Chinese critical mineral processing capability in Australia. This is a structural shift in the strategic relationship between the two countries.
Chapter 4. The Dig and Ship Problem. Can Australia actually change? The Australian government's own analysis identifies the dig and ship model as the central challenge facing Australian critical minerals strategy. The $7 billion in production tax incentives under the Future Made in Australia agenda, the $6 billion in government loans to critical mineral projects since 2019, the $1.2 billion strategic reserve, all of these are designed to push Australian critical mineral companies downstream, from mining to processing and refining. The obstacles are real and structural. Processing rare earths and battery materials is technologically demanding. It requires chemical engineering capabilities and environmental management systems that Australian mining companies have rarely needed to develop. The Chinese processing industry did not happen overnight. It was built over 30 years with sustained government support, low environmental standards, and access to cheap labor. Australia is attempting to build a comparable capability with higher environmental standards, higher labor costs, and without the 30-year head start. The alternative is to accept a permanent role as an upstream supplier, to be the world's quarry rather than the world's refinery. The financial case for this position is not entirely weak. Australian miners have been extraordinarily profitable from mining alone. The strategic case against it is compelling. A country that only mines but does not process has limited ability to ensure that the minerals it produces actually reach its strategic partners rather than flowing through the Chinese processing bottleneck, regardless of who originally dug them up. Chapter 5. The Three-Way Contest: Australia, China, and the West. The critical minerals contest is not a bilateral Australia-China story. It is a three-way competition between Australia as the resource supplier, China as the processor, and the Western Alliance, the US, Japan, EU, South Korea, as the industrial consumer. Each party has leverage that the others need. Australia's leverage is geological. The minerals are in Australian ground and cannot be relocated. It also has institutional leverage. A rule of law democracy with independent courts, property rights, and a track record of honoring long-term contracts makes it the preferred supplier for democracies that are trying to reduce Chinese dependency. China's leverage is processing. Years of investment have given China a processing infrastructure that cannot be replicated quickly, cheaply, or without environmental controversy. China also has demand leverage. Its own EV and renewable energy industries consume enormous quantities of critical minerals, meaning it is simultaneously the world's largest processor and one of the world's largest consumers. The West's leverage is capital and technology. The US, Japanese, and European companies that need critical minerals for their clean energy and defense industries have the financial resources to fund the processing infrastructure that Australia needs but cannot finance domestically. The deals being signed right now, US-Australia, US-Japan-Australia, Australia-EU critical minerals agreements, are all versions of the same exchange: Western capital and technology access in exchange for guaranteed mineral supply that bypasses Chinese processing.
Chapter 6. What Australia does next. Australia in 2026 is at the most consequential strategic crossroads it has faced since the Menzies-Japan deal of 1957. The choice then was engage with Asia or remain oriented toward the Atlantic. Menzies chose engagement. The compounding effect of that choice is the $283 billion Japanese investment and the $300 billion in resource exports that followed. The choice now is remain an upstream commodity supplier or build the processing and manufacturing capability that would make Australia not just the world's quarry, but the world's critical mineral refinery. The Menzies choice was relatively simple. It required a trade agreement and a willingness to sell coal to Japan. The current choice is harder. It requires building industrial capability that Australia has never had, in technologies that are still evolving, at a cost that requires sustained government commitment across multiple election cycles. The commitments being made, $7 billion in production tax incentives, $6 billion in government loans, the U.S.-Australia $8.5 billion deal, the Japan-Australia Critical Minerals Partnership are real. They are larger than anything previously committed to Australian industrial development. Whether they are large enough and focused enough to actually build processing capability at scale is the question that will be answered over the next 10 years. China's October 2025 export controls on rare earths created the urgency that Australian governments had been trying to manufacture through policy for years. When China announced that it would restrict rare earth exports, the Australian critical minerals industry received a credibility boost that no government announcement could have provided. The threat was real. The need for an alternative supply chain was suddenly visible to every Western car manufacturer, every defense contractor, and every renewable energy company that had been quietly accepting Chinese processing as an unavoidable reality. Australia has what the world needs. It now needs to decide whether to add value before it ships it. The answer to that question will determine whether the next 125 years look more like the Canada versus Australia story, one country that saw an opportunity and took it, or more like the Argentina story, a country with extraordinary natural wealth that failed to build the institutions and capabilities needed to fully realize it. $231 billion in exports, the world's most important quarry, the potential to become much more. This is Macro Atlas. Thank you for watching.